Thanks, Adam, and for all of you for coming along today on this rather dark day in Australia's history, because we're here because we've been betrayed. We've been betrayed by a government that promised to do something about climate change and has introduced a scheme that will do virtually nothing. And we're here because we've been betrayed by an opposition which also promised that it finally had woken up to the threat of climate change and would respond to the wishes of the Australian people to take serious action. Never before in the history of Australia, I'd suggest, have we been in such need of leadership. Never before have we so badly needed vision, and never before have we needed a government and a political system that can see into the future and protect the future for us and our children. As Adam said, under the CPRS, before it was watered down, Australia's emissions will not start to fall for another 25 years. At a time when, as climate scientists are saying, we're tracking on a path that is worse than the worst case projections. At a time when the climate scientists are saying that natural processes are kicking in, accelerating global warming, and instead of talking about the possibility of limiting it to 2 degrees, that's now regarded as completely beyond our grasp, and they're talking about the likelihood of 4, 5 and even 6 degrees of global warming. Now, the last time the Earth's climate varied by 5 degrees was during the last ice age, when New York was 50 metres under ice. That's the sort of transformation of the global climate we're looking at, with the sorts of weak responses that the Rudd government, now in cahoots with half of the Liberal Party, is planning to foist upon us. This CPRS legislation is so weak that the share prices of the energy utilities, the old coal-fired ones, haven't gone down. We'll only know that we're having an effect on greenhouse gases in Australia when we see a crash in the share prices of the coal-fired electricity generators. That simply has to happen. But of course, that's not happening because they're getting all they want and more. An additional $4 billion of taxpayers' funds will be transferred under this watered-down scheme to the big polluters, the coal-fired power plants, to compensate them for their polluting activity. The purpose of an emissions trading system is to cost them, to impose a penalty on them, not to reward them for continuing to pollute. The tragedy of this CPRS is that it will keep coal cheap, and we must make it more expensive in order to encourage the alternatives. And yet still the fossil fuel companies are complaining. It's still not enough. True Energy, which runs the Yallourn power plant, is out there complaining again. It's not enough. We want more. Have there ever been a group of more greedy, irresponsible and downright malicious corporations in Australia's history? I think not. Rent seekers, with their noses in the trough, run by executives who would sooner sacrifice the future of their own children than introduce and welcome the transition to a low-carbon future in this country, all to line the pockets, mainly of foreign-owned corporations. Not only are they greedy and profoundly self-interested, they're extraordinarily incompetent. They say this was a big surprise. We didn't know there was going to be an emissions trading system. Well, I've got news for them. It was foreshadowed back in 1995. Even John Howard, one of Australia's leading denialists, recognised the need to do it, and both parties went to the elections promising it. Why weren't they transitioning their corporations out of dirty fuels into the fuels of the future? These people don't deserve to run companies. They should be run out of town. They're incompetent, and their incompetence is going to cost Australia. Instead of making that industrial transition, instead of investing funds in low and zero carbon energy, what did they do? They hired lobbyists. They decided it would be cheaper and more effective to beef up the greenhouse mafia in Parliament House and get the legislation watered down, weakened, changed, massive compensation, rather than doing what they have to do morally and economically. They really are a shameful, appalling bunch of people. who run these coal-fired power plants, who would willingly sacrifice our future. He made great play when he came into power. This is the greatest moral challenge of our generation, he declaimed. He went to Bali and he lapped up the applause of the world because he said he would ratify the Kyoto Protocol. But Kevin the Conqueror turned into Kevin the Pussycat within a few months. And the coal-fired power plants and their greenhouse mafia lobbyists soon captured the Labor government just in the way that they had captured the Howard government. And so we all feel betrayed by Mr Rudd, who said he would take this issue seriously. And we commissioned a survey a few weeks ago which showed that when asked if the Labor government should negotiate with the Greens rather than the Liberals, 7 out of 10 Australians agreed. 7 out of 10 Australians want a stronger emissions trading system, not a weaker one. And yet it's the influence of that handful of greenhouse mafiosi in Canberra that has predominated over 7 in 10 Australians who said, no, we want something much stronger. And now in the Liberal Party, we have a party that's ribbon, split down the middle. Half of them, it turns out, don't believe in climate change at all. Half of them agree with Senator Minchin, who's still fighting ideological battles that we thought ended 20 years ago. He believes it's all a communist plot. That the scientists are in cahoots. That they've been carrying out a massive scientific fraud, which has somehow got in under the radar. And these old men, living in the past, are willing to sacrifice the future of Australia, including that of their own children, on the altar of their old ideological prejudices. They're willing to sacrifice, as this CPRS does, they're willing to sacrifice our world and our children's world. They're willing to sacrifice our future and our children's future. So, what do we have to do? Well, we have to protest. We have to protest loudly, angrily, insistently, and we must never give up. We have to recapture the democratic system that's been stolen from us by these corporate interests in cahoots with a weak government. And we have to drive the greenhouse mafia out of Canberra and tell them never to come back. Because our democratic system has been corrupted, and we need to recapture it and reinvigorate it. We need to create a people's democracy once again, a people's democracy that will truly reflect the will of the Australian people, a people's democracy that will develop and implement policies based on the science, not on the spurious claims of the sceptics and the greenhouse mafia. We need a people's democracy that will put the interests of the future, that will put the interests of our children ahead of those of the profits of mainly foreign-owned corporations. We need a people's democracy that will act to protect us from climate chaos.